Hi and welcome to this Macmillan Education webinar on teaching and assessing writing at B1 and B2 levels. My name is Richard Twigg. Some of you might be familiar with me, might have met me before. So let's get started with teaching and assessing writing. So first thing I would like you to do is I would like you to think about the last time you wrote something. So what I want you to do here is think about the last time you wrote anything. Could be a postcard, could be an email, could be a letter, could be a shopping list. When you think about it, I want you to think about these things. Who or for whom you wrote. So think about who it was. Were you writing for yourself? Were you writing for somebody else? Writing on behalf of somebody else? Writing it for somebody else? Why were you writing? What was you must have had a reason. And how did you write this? Using pen and paper? Did you use mouse? Did you use your keyboard? Did you use your mobile phone, etc.? So I'll give you an example. If, for example, you were writing a shopping list for yourself, that shopping list would vary very differently than if you're writing it for your husband or your partner. So if you're writing for yourself, you probably write it in shorthand, scribbled some notes, aid memoir. I write my shopping list for myself on my phone, on my notes. And then I go into the supermarket and I buy what I need to buy. Why do I do it? Because if I don't, I forget things. I'm getting old and forgetful. I've said how I do it. Now, if, for example, you were writing that shopping list for somebody else, as my partner learned to her peril, she just said to me, will you go to the market and buy some fruit and vegetables? Well, I came back having spent 30 euros and she nearly had a heart attack. Well, she didn't tell me how many of each item she wanted. Did she want a kilo, half a kilo? Did she want a bunch? Did she want 2 bunches? So I just randomly, and my Italian not being very good, I just asked for some of those and some of those, and obviously ended up getting more than we needed or more than I bargained for. So whenever we write something, we always have those particular things in mind. So let's have a look at a writing process. So have a read through this on your own. I think it's easier if you read it than if I read it to you. So okay, so having read that, what do you think the first thing is that this particular journalist is going to do? So hopefully you'll be thinking possibly he's going to make some notes, do some research, think about what it is that he wants the article to cover. Maybe he's going to think about the audience. Who knows? What's the one thing that he's not going to do? And he's not going to go to his computer, or they're not going to go to their computer and start writing immediately. So that begs the question, why do our students do that? The moment we ask them to write something or we give them a writing task, how many times do the students start writing? I've invigilated or been an invigilator for quite a few exams. And I've noticed the moment you say your time starts now, start writing, a lot of students pick up their pencil. They spend maybe 30 seconds, if that, reading the question, and they immediately start writing. So it's clear they haven't thought about it, they haven't read the question, they haven't analyzed the question. And you know yourselves that when you see a piece of writing that has not been planned in any way, shape, or form, it's clear from the first sentence, and it's very difficult to read. It doesn't engage the reader, and unfortunately in an exam situation it doesn't get very good marks. And that's obviously what we are working on, is not only teaching writing, but how we assess our students' writing and give them valuable feedback on what they've produced. So there is a process to writing, and it involves a number of steps. And what's important to mention at this stage is that these steps are in an ideal world. These are not steps that we expect our students to follow all the time. They're not steps that they can follow in an exam situation, but they are things that they need to be aware of. And only by being aware of all of these steps can they take shortcuts, can they exclude some of them, can they join some of them together, but they need to be aware of these particular steps or processes. So the very first thing that we do when we do writing is we need to collect data, whether that be through reading, research, brainstorming, thinking, analyzing, using our schemata, thinking about the topic. Just by reading the question will also help us to narrow down what it is, what is being asked of us. So we collect that data. Then we need to select, because if we brainstorm properly, we should have a lot of unnecessary data, a lot of data that we can't use, a lot of irrelevant data. We should hopefully have too much data so we can be selective and decide what's the most important, what can we talk about, what's relevant, what's not relevant, good examples, etc. Once you've selected it, then we clearly need to think about planning our essay. So how are we going to start it? What's the introduction going to be? What are we going to write in paragraph 1? What examples are we going to use? What do we want to write in paragraph 2? Are they asking for advantages, disadvantages, agree, disagree? What is it they're looking for? So we plan the structure that is required of us. Are we writing a review, an essay, an article? Once we've planned it, then we have to do an initial draft. So we start deciding, okay, how am I going to plan? What am I going to get an idea, get a bit of a skeleton going. Then once we've drafted, then we start crafting it. Writing is an art form. And with any art form, we have to create, we have to craft something. So, and we want to create something that is going to engage the reader, that's going to interest the reader, that's going to capture their attention, but also maintain their attention, make them want to read more. After we've crafted it, we possibly need to do a little bit of editing. As with any piece of artwork, we need to touch up, we need to look, we need to change a few things. We decide that sentence would be better with that word or with that piece of vocabulary, so we change things around. Then we possibly, after looking at the editing, we might well want to rewrite it. Now, obviously, as I've said before, in an exam situation, we don't have that luxury. But we can, when we're practicing and working, we can get used to rewriting and writing and rewriting. Those of you like myself that were brought up before the time of computers, when we wrote something, wrote by hand, wrote the first draft, didn't like it, edited it, we had to rewrite it. We didn't have the opportunity of copy and paste. So where there was a lot of rewriting until we reached the final version. Once we have rewritten it, we obviously need to proofread it. And this is very important, particularly in an exam situation where the students do need to take time to proofread their work before they hand it in. So it's important to work on the timing with that. And the proofreading will help to iron out or to correct slips, mistakes, errors that the students have made that they can identify themselves. And that will help with the marking. They'll get a better mark because they'll identify them before the examiner identifies them, and they won't lose marks for those mistakes. So when it comes to setting the task, so setting a task of writing. So writing is a lonely task. We know that, and all too often we set writing as a homework task, something to be done at home. I personally think that we need to bring writing back into the classroom. We need to get those initial steps, brainstorming, gathering of information, selecting, crafting some of the ideas. We need to do that in the classroom. Students can do that together. They can help, they can learn from each other. And then the final task of putting those ideas into an essay, an article, a review can be done at home. But a lot of the stuff can be done in the classroom. But when we set the task, it's very important to make sure that the task that we set is clear. Do the students know what's expected of them? Do we just give them a writing task and expect that they know and understand what they need to do? So we need to help them to unpick the question, unpack information, work out what is really being asked of them, get them used to underlining, highlighting the key words. Even worth getting them to summarize in a short statement or a question what the task is all about, so that they know what they need to answer. Their writing needs to answer a certain question. Do the students know what they have to do? So what do the students have to do? Do they have to write a report, a review, an essay? Is it something they're familiar with? Are they familiar with that particular genre? I take the example from the Cambridge preliminary exam, where students are asked to write a postcard. Now, how many of your students have ever received a postcard, let alone written a postcard? So when we ask them to do something like that and we give them a big piece of paper, we're not really creating the right environment. So maybe we should be giving them pieces of paper that are the size of a postcard, so they get to feel what it's like to write in a postcard or on a postcard in the space, so it feels more real. When we set the task, there are some important questions that we as teachers, or you as teachers, need to ask yourselves. So the first one is, when should we set the task? Ideally, we shouldn't be setting the task 5 minutes before the bell goes, 5 minutes before the end of the lesson. Oh, by the way, here's your homework. It's a piece of writing for you to do. We should set the task when we have time to analyze it with the students, for the students to analyze it. The students need to be aware of what's expected of them, what the task involves, and what it is that they need to do as a result of the task that we have set them. Next thing is that we need to double check that how familiar the students are with the communicative context. So as we've said before, if we ask our students to write a postcard, we mentioned that before, but if we ask them to write a review or a report or a for or against essay, have they ever seen a model example? Do they know what's expected of them? If they write a newspaper article, have they actually seen a newspaper article? Do they know excuse me, the format that is expected, or the way that the particular writing should be laid out or set out? So if they're writing an email, they're more familiar with that, but we need to make sure that they're familiar with the communicative context that we are asking them to produce. Otherwise, they're just going to produce what they think should be done, and that's not what expected of them in the exam. 3 questions that we alluded to at the beginning. So whenever we do a piece of writing, we ask our students to do a piece of writing, you should always be thinking about the audience. Who are you writing to? Who is the person that is going to be reading this particular piece of writing? And that is always stated in the question, certainly in an exam context. It tells you who your target audience is, who you're writing for. And it's important that the students read that and imagine that person. So you're writing to your best friend, you're writing to the manager of a shop to complain, you're writing to request information, you're writing for a newspaper editor. That person, you need to be thinking of who that person is. Secondly, you need to think about the purpose. Why are you writing? Are you writing to inform, to complain, to request information, to gather information, to report on something. So the purpose is very important. Why are you writing? Because it's an exam question. No, that's not why you're writing. The next thing is the result or the effect that you want your piece of writing to have. What do you want to achieve by writing this task? And it's not to pass the exam. It's not to get a better grade. What are you hoping to do? You're writing again to inform. You want somebody to act on what you've written. You want somebody to respond. You want somebody to reply, give you a refund. You want somebody to have information on which they can act. So it's important as to what the result is. If we look at the shopping list, like we said before, the result is that you want that person, or you want to come back with the goods that you need. You don't want to come back having forgotten something. You want to make a cake, you want to do some baking. If you come back minus an ingredient, well, then your task has not been achieved. So what I think, as with a lot of things in life, we need to tackle things step by step. So small steps. As we're in Italy, good phrase or expression is that Rome wasn't built in a day. And I think by the same token, we need to take things small steps, particularly with writing, particularly in the beginning. We need to build and help the students. We need to teach them, and we need to take them step by step through the process. From the beginning, we've seen all those processes involved, and we need to do each process bit by bit. So what can we do? We can ask the students to change or improve words in a text. Examples could be that we could ask them to replace the phrasal verbs with one-word verbs, or we could ask them to change a text from formal to informal, or informal to formal. We could also ask them to look for synonyms for words, or to change it from positive to negative. So just simple things to start off with to get the students used to reading the writing, working with that piece of text. The next thing that we could do, next level, we could ask students to write or rewrite at sentence level. So we could ask them to rewrite whole sentences, not just words. So convert that sentence from a positive to a negative sentence, or from formal to informal, change the whole sentence, not just the word. I think this quote by Michael Jordan is very interesting. I will let you have a read through it on your own. So I approached everything step by step. So all goals need to be achieved step by step. We need to take them step by step. One step at a time is how we approach things generally in life. And I think it's also important that we break down writing into steps, and we help the students, and we don't move on to the next step until we've consolidated or refined the previous step. So very important to do things step by step. So let's move on to feedback. So we've worked through, we've got our students to produce a piece of writing. Now, what do you do when it comes to feedback? So most teachers, out comes the red pen. We start correcting, we start annotating, we start scribbling. So what kind of things do you do? Do you do any of these? Cross out, correct, self-correct? Do you use a correction code or an annotation scheme? Do you tick? Do you comment? Do you highlight? Those are various things that people tend to do. We'll have a look at a couple of those. So but before we do that, let's have a look at what we do post-correction. So we've spent time correcting the work. Do we then give them an overall grade? A lot of the time we do. A lot of the time that's what the students expect, and that's the only thing they look at. Look at the grade, they're not interested in anything else. Do we write an overall comment at the end? Well done, nice try, better than last time, giving them some kind of encouragement, or you need to work on your introduction or your conclusion? Do we give them any kind of feedback, or do we just grade it and nothing else? Do we give them some kind of feedback? Yes, I've noticed that you've improved on this area or that area. Now we need to move on to the next area. Now, I know the next point might be quite contentious. With you having 30 odd students in a class, sometimes more, you give them a piece of writing, you spend most of your Sundays writing, marking the writing. Now along I come and I say, why don't you ask them to redo it so that you can spend yet another Sunday marking it? Well, I'm afraid, ladies and gents, that if you take the time and the trouble, as you do as teachers, to mark, to grade, to comment, to correct their writing, if we don't invite our students to redo, to take what we have worked on, to analyze what we've written, to look at the corrections or the annotations that we've made, and to then redo, rewrite using our feedback, then we'll have to ask ourselves the questions: why bother in the first place? Why correct it in the first place if we're not going to get the students to work on? Because all too often the students look at the grade and they file a piece of paper away. So really, what was the point? They haven't learned anything. We've spent time grading it, thinking about it. But if the students don't do anything, then really, is there any point in us grading it or marking it? I really do think that we need to get the students to work on. So this could be an example of the rewriting, but rewriting after feedback. Another possibility is that we could utilize their writing. So we might take 3 or 4 pieces of writing, take some sentences, take those sentences, put them together, create a piece of text, and ask the students to then correct or work on or identify parts of speech, correct usage, incorrect usage, good sentences, etc. So again, we can use what the students write. Students are a great resource. Why don't we use what they produce more? We do it in speaking, so we can also do it in writing. Looking at the correction code, I'm pretty certain some of you have used something similar. If you do have a correction code, it is really important that the students are aware of what the code means. So it's quite common to use the upside down V to show that there's a word missing, start a new sentence. I use the double lines to show a new paragraph far too often. Here in Italy, it's something that the students struggle with, using paragraphs, writing paragraphs, which is something we'll look at later. Sometimes people just write in the margin that it's a grammatical error somewhere in that sentence, or a spelling error, or it's a punctuation error, or an error with the articles. If we do that, it's really important that the students then take that piece of writing, identify or try to identify the error, correct it, and then rewrite it or reword it, and hand it back in for correction again. And hopefully, yes, in the beginning, there's a lot of extra work, but it will reap benefits that eventually the writing will improve and the students will see the improvement. They'll see the benefit of doing that piece of writing more than once. So let's look at when we talk about grading. So sometimes we just grade and we give them a mark, a percentage, give them an A minus, B, however you want to grade. I would like to suggest that we use what's called criterion highlighting. So if we are preparing students for an exam, they are going to be assessed according to certain criteria in that exam. So in my opinion, we should be using the same criteria to grade or to give feedback or to mark their writing so that they know where they're going. So in any exam, these criteria are readily available, and we as teachers should be aware of this criteria, but we should also make our students aware of the criteria against which they are going to be marked or assessed. So in the Cambridge main suite of exams, the criteria are content, so you get a mark for content, you get a mark for organization, you get a mark for communicative achievement, and you get a mark for language accuracy and range. So those 4 areas, and basically there are 5 bands or 5 scores that the students can get, so from 1 to 5. So where, as you can see, to get a 2, it shares performance features with bands 1 and 3, and for 4, it shares performance features with bands 3 and 5. Now, the bands are relatively descriptive, so you can sort of see to get, for content, the target reader is fully informed, get a 5. All content is relevant to the task. If there are minor irrelevances and or omissions may be present, target reader on the whole is informed, would be a band 3 or score 3. So again, so the students would get a mark out of 20. So I think it's more useful for the students to know, okay, here I got a 3, here I got a 5, here I got a 2, here I got a 2. So I know the areas where I need to work, and I need to know why, and I understand why I got the score that I did. So the students know where their strengths and weaknesses are. And next time, hopefully, they will get all 4s or all 5s, or they will improve. But they can only do that if they know where they're making mistakes and if they are shown and explained how the criteria works, and if you mark according to that criteria. Because the other thing is, it also helps us to look at the writing in these 4 areas. Otherwise, we tend to give a global mark. And unfortunately, a lot of the time, the global mark, the mistakes or the errors tend to crowd out, and we tend to overlook some of the positive issues or some of the other areas where possibly they have achieved or ticked the boxes, but the errors kind of mask and we get drawn in, particularly because we're using red pen, or as teachers, we're looking for mistakes. So we tend to focus in on the errors rather than taking what I call a bit of a helicopter view and looking at it almost in the beginning in 4 different, we've got to look at it 4 times in the beginning until we get comfortable with looking at it once and thinking about the 4 areas all at the same time. So let's have a look here at an example. So this is an example of part of a letter that a student was given in an exam that they've received from an English friend. So the students are asked to write a letter giving the friend some advice. The letter should be in about 100 words. And it basically says, my grandmother has given me some money. There's enough to buy a really good camera or go on holiday with my friends. My parents want me to save the money. What do you think? So 3 options: buy a camera, go on holiday, or save my money. So they're writing to ask for suggestions. So the student needs to write a letter to their English friend. So let's have a look and see one example of what a student wrote. So now I can see that as teachers, you're all itching to get your hands onto this. You want to get out your red pens, your green pens, whatever color pen you want to use, and you want to start correcting or underlining or doing what you do when you see a student's piece of writing. However, I would like you to read this piece of text. Okay, so first of all, I would like you to think with your current marking scheme system, what would you give the student? How would you grade? What would you say to the student? So maybe you would say it's pretty poor, a lot of errors, etc., etc. Now I would like you to look at that, thinking about the 4 criteria that we mentioned before. content, communicative achievement, organization, and language. Okay, so I want you to give it a mark out of 5 for content, communicative achievement, organization, and language. So let's go back. So content, communicative achievement, language, and organization. Not so easy the first time you do it, and obviously when you do it, it's much easier if you have the actual criteria with you and you can look and say, yes, it ticks that box. No, it doesn't tick that box. Yes, it ticks that box. Okay, I would give it a score of X. So luckily, I'm not directly in front of you, so I can avoid some of the shock faces that I'm going to get. But let's have a look and see what the examiner thought the student would get. So I gave them a 4. Okay. Although there are some irrelevance at the start when the candidate repeats a situation rather than offering advice, the task has been addressed. The target reader is informed, and it's true. If we look at it, if we go back, they have addressed the task, they have given suggestions, and the target reader is informed, regardless of the errors, of the mistakes that the student has made. There are straightforward ideas that are communicated in generally appropriate ways. And they did attempt the format of the letter. So the introduction, the salutation at the beginning, and the salutation at the end. For the letter is connected and coherent. It does flow to a certain extent, not very well, but there is some kind of a flow. Sentences tend to be short and are connected with limited number of basic linking words and or and cohesive devices, that and the money. Okay, but that good new and with the money. Okay, vocabulary, everyday vocabulary is used appropriately. Simple grammatical forms are used with reasonable control. Several errors are present, but meaning can still be determined. That good new, we know that they want to say that that's good news. You can to buy, you can buy. Make photos, take photos. Tell me your decide, tell me your decision. So they've tried, they've made an attempt. So if we have to look overall, basically the examiner's saying that on average, they're going to get 60%. They're going to get 3s in every area. If the 4 moves down to make the 2 a 3, they're all 3s, so that's enough to then pass. So but do you see that if we look, this is where we would be focusing. We would be focusing on these mistakes and these limits here, and we would overlook the fact that the target reader is informed that in actual fact, in achieving the task, they have achieved the task. Okay, they have attempted the letter and they have used everyday vocabulary. So the weak area here, which is the weak area, we would let that filter in and affect all of the marking. So it's important that we use that. Now, it's not to say that you guys would give them the same mark. It's fine if you were to say, okay, well, I would give it no more than a 3 instead of a 4, and possibly I might even think that a 3 and a 3 is generous, and I might give the student 2s. That's fine, but at least the student knows where they're going. They know where to improve, and when they get to the exam, they might be pleasantly surprised and get a slightly higher mark. So it doesn't mean that you now have to be overly generous and give away marks that you wouldn't do. It's just important that the students know where they are now, what they need to do to improve, and we need to help them to improve. So when they get to the exam, they feel better placed and they know what the exam is looking for. They know which boxes to tick and what to do to get the right score they need. So when we look at the other parts of the Cambridge First, for example, we now analyze the question. So in your English class, you've been talking about the environment. Now your English teacher has asked you to write an essay. So you're writing for the English teacher. They want you to write an essay using all your notes and giving reasons. So your notes are that every country has problems. You've written notes about it. So you've said transport, rivers and seas. What's very important is you need to come up with your own idea. And this is where brainstorming comes in. The students need to be able to think of a third idea. Without a third idea, they lose marks. So it's very important before they start writing, they read the question, they understand the question, they know who they're writing for, they know why they are writing, okay? They're writing to talk about and explain, do they think these problems can be solved? What the problems are and can they be solved and how they can be solved, okay? And they're going to write it in an essay style. That's how they're going to write it, okay? So those are the key things that the students are thinking about. They also know that they need to write between 140 and 190 words. So just by reading the question, now they read the question, understand it, analyze it. Now they can start thinking of a third idea. So transport, rivers, seas. So they could have the air pollution. They could have parks. They could have traffic, but we've got transport here, but you know, they could think of other ideas that they could think of, litter, other things that are to do with pollution. So, keyword for me, paragraphing. This is where a lot of Italian students struggle a lot with the idea of a paragraph. What is a paragraph? Why do they need paragraphs? What's the point of a paragraph? So let's start off with what a paragraph is. So a paragraph is a group of related sentences that develop a main thought or idea about a single topic. A single topic. One topic, one paragraph. In the English style of writing, not writing in English, but in the English style of writing, we use paragraphs all the time, and paragraphs are essential. So let's not forget that not only are the students writing in English, but they're also writing in an English style, and an English style requires paragraphs and paragraphing. Well, three basic elements of a paragraph. They are a topic sentence. This states the main or controlling idea of that particular paragraph. And then any supporting details. And these, as it says here, explain the main point and include examples. So we should always be backing up any of our main points with examples. Support your idea with examples. Let's look at an example paragraph. So, one factor contributing to homelessness is the lack of cheap accommodation. Many major cities like New York face homelessness problems, mainly because there is a shortage of family housing along with high property rents. In addition, there are many empty properties in these cities, which could be used to alleviate the situation. So, the blue is the topic sentence. One factor contributing to homelessness is the lack of cheap accommodation. We then go on to support that by stating the fact about the problem like New York City and what we can do. There are many empty properties. So the green and the black are two supporting sentences. Then we look at things like linkers, in addition, signposting, like as an example, mainly because, so now I'm giving a reason. So these kind of things help to guide the reader, to keep the target reader informed, to let them know where we're going, and also these score points from the point of view of the examiner. So this was taken from Ready for IELTS Second Edition by Sam McCarter. So this was that same paragraph, okay? Topic sentence at the beginning. And the following, or the follow-up paragraph. So one idea was this factor contributing to homelessness was the lack of cheap accommodation. This is followed up by an example that governments should therefore encourage property owners to rent out their properties for those without homes. And then there's an example. And such measures would then help to alleviate the situation. Although this is not a complete answer, it ought to be considered. So one idea, one paragraph. In both cases, we've got examples, we've got supporting statements, and we've got a link between the two paragraphs, which is also important, that the paragraphs don't stand alone. There needs to be some kind of a link between the paragraphs, that it flows all the way through the text. So if we look here, the first paragraph, we've got 52 words, second paragraph, 58 words, so 110 words. If we're writing for Cambridge First, where we need 140 to 190, we're well on the way. If we're writing for IELTS Task 2, we're just over a third of the way. So we need a minimum of 250. But if we have an introduction, we have a conclusion, and we have a third paragraph, we're starting to get where we need to get to. Okay. So let's move on to IELTS Task 1. So how does IELTS Task 1 work? Well, IELTS Task 1 provides a defined input requiring a predictable response. It's a direct test. It's tightly controlled to maximize reliability. There's no time wasted on thinking up ideas, because all the student needs to do is look at the graph, diagram, flowchart, etc., report what they see, and write. So they don't need to think up ideas, they just report on what they see. No conclusions. There's no analysis of the data is either expected or rewarded. They're actually punished or penalized if they try to interpret the data. So the reason for the rise or the reason for the fall is X. No, just report what you see, report facts. Looking at Task 2 and how Task 2 works. Task 2 introduces a topic followed by questions requiring a discursive response. Now here I've put this in red, that it's worth twice as much as Task 1. So in Task 1, 150 words. In Task 2, minimum of 250 words. So 100 extra words. So as a result, the students are encouraged to spend more time on Task 2 than on Task 1. So there is more words, more text for the examiner to give more marks for. So that's why they should spend more time, because it is worth more marks in that respect, more opportunity. So Task 2 provides a valid framework to stimulate ideas. It provides an opportunity for candidates to show their strengths, to show how good their grammar vocabulary is. There is no right answer, but the students need to take a point, take an opinion, and to defend it. So it's very important. They're not going to be penalized. It's not an IQ test, but they do need to be able to defend the point that they take. It's also done in such a way that it limits the learner from learning an answer, a response, a generic response that could be adapted to any kind of situation. So the students do need to read and analyze and answer the question that is in front of them. So what kind of format does Task 2 take on? So Task 2 is a point of view is stated. So the candidates are asked if they agree or disagree, and obviously to give reasons as to why. A alternative view is given, and the candidates are asked to comment on both views and do they agree or disagree. A statement is made followed by two questions. Very important here that they answer both questions. There's two questions, you must cover both questions. There are two opposing views given. Candidates must discuss both views and give their own opinion with reasons. So with any of these, it's very important that the students read the whole question, unpack the whole question, and answer the whole question. And every single question asks for give reasons or examples from your own knowledge and experience. It's very important that the students back up any of the examples they give with examples from their own knowledge and experience. So in IELTS, as with the Cambridge exams, there are 4 assessment criteria. They are known as task achievement, coherence and cohesion, lexical resource, and grammatical range and accuracy. But here I've put them slightly differently. So getting the task, understanding the task, and sticking to it. Task achievement or task response. Planning and writing coherently in the given time. Cohesion and coherence. They only have 1 hour in which to complete task 1 and task 2, not a minute longer. Having the grammar and syntax to produce a coherent answer. This is cohesion and coherence. Does the text stick together? Do the paragraphs link? Is there an idea? Is there a thread? Does it flow? Does it follow? And having the right vocabulary, lexical resource. So we're having the right vocabulary to match the task. Okay. So here having the grammar, so this is the grammatical range and accuracy. So what should we do when we're teaching task 1? So in addition, in task 1, generally speaking, it's a bar chart, line graph, diagram, pie chart are the main areas that they get asked, but they can also be asked to describe a process, a diagram, a map, but the ideas are exactly the same. So in academic IELTS, the most important thing is to understand graphs and diagrams. What is the type of graphs or diagram that I come, and what is the purpose? They need to be able to select the main points and summarize the information that they see. They need to be able to describe trends using the right vocabulary. So talking about rise, fall, decline, peak, trough, sharp decline, sharp fall, sudden rise, plateau, those kind of things. Then they need to be able to compare, but also to group information, because in the graph, they might have 1 line, they might have 4 lines, and they don't have in 150 words time to describe every single point on every single line. They might need to be able to group the information together to describe and to then compare certain parts of the information. They could also be asked to describe the process, just describe how bricks are made. Now, obviously, they're not engineers. They're given most of the vocabulary that they need in order to describe the process, but they need to follow through and describe that in a linear pattern. They might also need to describe how something works, how a hydroelectric plant works. So water flows down and then flows back up again, gets restored, recycled, etc. All the processes are there. They just need to look at it and analyze and decide how they're going to talk it through. So on test day, what should students do, or even before test day, this can be done. First thing they need to do is they need to write an introduction. Very, very important. And in the introduction, there are 3 questions they need to answer. Excuse me, the what, the where, and the when. So if they remember those 3 questions when they're looking for the introduction, it will help them vastly. Then they need to highlight the key features with figures or with data from the graph. If it is a graph or a pie chart. So it could be percentages, it could be numbers, it could be years, depends what figures are used in the graph. and they need to write a rounding off statement or an overview. In my opinion, this overview should be linked to the introduction, because without an overview, you cannot get more than a band 5 in task 1. So the overview is crucial, and it must be clear that it is an overview and that it's not part of the general body of the text. So overall or something like that would help to show the examiner that you've written an overview. So if we have a look here, the graph below shows the global sales by year of a number of Apple devices. So we've got the Mac, the iPod, the iPhone. The years are 2002 to 2013, and sales by year valued in millions of units. Okay. So the students are asked to summarize the information by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons where relevant. That's the task. That's what we've been asked to do. So let's look at the introduction. So for the introduction, the graph illustrates, the line graph illustrates would be even better, worldwide sales of 3 Apple devices, the Mac, the iPod, and the iPhone, over the 11-year period from 2002 to 2013. So remember, we had 3 questions we needed to ask. The what, 3 Apple devices, the Mac, the iPod, the iPhone. The where, worldwide sales. And the when, over the 11-year period from 2002 to 2013. What about the overview? So the point of the overview is it should give the examiner an idea of what the graph looks like without the examiner actually seeing the graph. It should be an overall statement, not looking at any specifics, just to get a general trend, general idea. So from the data provided, we can see that Mac and iPod sales continue to drop, whereas the iPhone was selling well, and the upward trend looks set to continue. So 2 are going down, 1's going up. Then afterwards, we can go into details, analyze, look and see when the drop started, when the rise started, etc., etc. But so we've got introduction, overview, the rest then flows on from there. So we've said for task 1, write an introduction using the what, where, and when. We need to write an overview. And we need to highlight the key features with figures. Those are the key things that we said we needed to do for task 1. For task 2, what do we need to do? We need to get the students generating ideas, brainstorming, having something to say, and being able to support it with examples, arguments, saying why they agree. So supporting statements with examples. Being able to plan the essay, organizing ideas, having main and supporting ideas. Now here the students have 40 minutes to write 250 words. In my opinion, students should be spending a good 10 minutes planning, thinking about, brainstorming what they're going to write. Then they've got 30 minutes to, well, 25 minutes to write, because remember we said they need 5 minutes at the end to proofread. So if they break it down like that, they will have their 5 minutes easily. They'll to proofread, read over it, remembering their paragraphing, they're deciding what they're going to say in each paragraph. Okay. So we need to teach them how to write an opinion, how to express a point of view. In my opinion, I believe that it is generally considered, whatever they're going to say. Being able to balance their views. Some people believe this, I believe that, whereas on the other hand, some people believe the opposite, or it's not believed by everybody, or to look at these. So it's very important in IELTS that you look at both sides of the argument, but it doesn't have to be a 50-50 balance. They need to make concessions. They can't just only look at one side of the argument. They do need to look at the other side and see other points of view as well. They need to make sure that their ideas link together. There is some kind of linking thread that flows through all of their writing. And obviously, with any good piece of writing, there needs to be a conclusion. So don't just finish mid-sentence, round it off, shows the examiner that you've timed your essay, that you haven't just run out of time and you've put down your pencil when they said pencils down, you're halfway through a sentence. It shows that you haven't properly planned, and apart from anything, you haven't proofread either. So, ladies and gents, that brings us to the end of this webinar. I sincerely hope that it has been useful and informative. I hope that you have some ideas that you can now take away, and I hope that you feel better prepared to be able to not only teach, but also to be able to assess your students' writing at B1 and B2. Thanks very much for your time and attention, and stay safe. Thanks all. All the best. Take care.